in Buffalo. Former All Black halfback, Sky Sports commentator, a man who is well recognised as probably the best analytical voice in New Zealand rugby. Justin Marshall joins us again, kicking off 2024. Marshy, welcome back, mate. I hope it's not too late to say Happy New Year, because I'll say it. There you go.
Not at all, Marty, and Happy New Year to you and everybody out there listening to us on the platform. Isn't it unreal, mate, that we're already, getting into the deep dates of January and thinking about the rugby season? How quick does that happen?
Well, let's just first and foremost acknowledge the fact that we've all had a few weeks off, and hasn't it been glorious? Because this is what rugby really needs. You've got to take a break, don't you?
You do, but, mate, I did find it really, intriguing when I saw that the All Blacks have already had a camp.
Yeah.
And that Scott Robertson's already had them in, and, you just wonder whether or not those guys that went through that arduous Rugby World Cup had just mentally had enough time off, and they were all of a sudden then thrust into fitness testing. Now, when that's looming over you, and I've experienced this in my time, when they test you that early, and obviously you've got a new All Black coach, you don't want to let yourself down, so you don't ever really button off, because you don't want to go there and do a really crappy fitness test and be off the pace, because it's not a good look to the new coach. So, I was really interested that he had them in that quickly and wanted to find out a lot about them this soon in the season.
Same, and I'll add to that, to call it an All Black squad, look, there are a bunch of All Blacks and guys that have played for the All Blacks, but when we haven't seen any rugby this year, it's difficult to say, hey, that is the All Blacks, isn't it? I would be hoping that Razor's first message to everyone is that here's the whiteboard, there's not a single name on it. I want you to start putting your names on it with your Super Rugby performances.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. And look, I guess sometimes it's nice, and Razor is an astute coach, and obviously his success is very evident, and he has a manner and a way about him, and this may be formulating the structure that he wants to show any player that wants to play for him, that they have to front whenever he asks them to. But at the end of the day, the other way to do it would be to set out his requirements, that these are the expectations of the scrum halves fitness test wise. This is what my front row has been able to squat and bench press, and then they could have done that within their Super Rugby franchises. So yeah, look, I'm sure there's some real method behind the madness of getting them in that early at that stage of the year when it's boiling hot, but time will tell how it plays out.
Before we get on to Joe Schmidt, Justin Marshall is with us. Yeah, let's just continue this theme while we're on it. What kind of changes do you think that he's going to make? Perhaps not to the personnel, because that'll all unfold in front of us, but just in terms of the way that the All Blacks play style-wise compared to with him in his tenure at the Crusaders.
So I think you're on point already, Marty, which is good to see. Obviously, you haven't been buttoning off over the new year because absolutely, mate. I don't think there's so much intrigue for me around who he's going to select. Yes, there'll be some players that may have been All Blacks in the past that won't be there. There'll be some new All Blacks. There's some players that he knows more about that he'll want in his mix. But all of that, and you're absolutely right, revolves around the type of game that he'll want the All Blacks to play and the type of game he wants to take through to the next World Cup. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, the rest of the world in the last 8 years have caught up with us. And all of the results that we've seen is testament to that. So I know Razor, he's a good mate of mine, so sometimes it's hard to speak, but I know that he won't mind me saying he was a little frustrated at times with the type of style the All Blacks were playing. I expect him to make some tweaks and some changes and to select certain players around that game plan. I expect us to see a lot more ball in play, a lot more tempo in the way that the All Blacks play, and certainly some innovation away from too much pod work. So, you never know. There'll be obviously other coaches that'll have input. He's got a good coaching group, but I think you're on point with what you said. I think we will see a real enhancement of the way the All Blacks have been playing, particularly in the last 4 years when he gets a hold of them and brings his type of pattern to the ballpark.
Can I just go back to what I was saying about Super Rugby and starting with an absolutely clean slate? I mean, obviously you can't do that because you're not going to toss away all the experience and you're not going to toss away those guys that have proven that they have the ability to play at the highest level. But what I'd like to see during Super Rugby is I want this nonsense of not being able to play 5 games in a row to stop. I want this nonsense of restricted minutes to stop. I want this nonsense of the All Blacks come back late to stop. And I'll say this because we're going to lead into the Joe Schmidt thing. Justin, this silly argument about, we need Australian rugby to be good. We don't need Australian rugby to be good. This is the way I see it. We need the Super Rugby competition to be good. And the flow-on effect from if it is and it becomes stronger, becomes back to being one of the very best comps in the world, Australia will benefit from that. But, this is the only thing we have to prepare our All Blacks for international rugby. So to me, I would rather focus on that and get these guys playing every single week. Put them absolutely to the limits of what they can produce, because that's only going to benefit us in terms of those international test matches, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And again, I'm not going to offer any rebuttal because you're bang on. Like, at the end of the day, what we want is we want those Super Rugby franchises pushing our players every weekend, because we are now missing those elements of physicality that we once had with the Wallabies, who are a very strong forward pack, loose forwards that play tough. And then you take the South Africans out of the mix. We can beat the Australians by out-physicaling them, but we cannot and have not been able to out-physical South Africa in particular of late. And them beating us twice last year, proved that point. So what we need is for those Australian sides to recognise where their faults are, and that is, to a degree, their physicality that they bring to the game. They need to up their levels of that, and then bring their unique particular set of skill set into that, and really start making our players work hard. They have to work hard to clean a ruck, to make sure we get crisp, clean ball, because big bodies cannot be moved as easy, or tougher, stronger players are harder to extricate. So, yes, absolutely, I agree. We need those Super Rugby franchises playing stronger and being more physical and being competitive, and that'll just have a roll-on effect into the Australian national team, and they'll get some confidence as well.
All right, before we get on to Joe Schmidt then, finally, 9 and 10, who do you think is going to be starting the very first test for the All Blacks this year? Who are your 9 and 10? If you had to pick them right now, injuries, obviously, everyone is available and fit and ready.
Well, I'm really intrigued about who's going to come into the mix. Now, obviously, Beauden Barrett will be done with his sabbatical, so he'll come back into the mix. But equally, I was thinking about TJ Perenara. Now, where does he sit in the thought process now that Aaron Smith is gone? I don't know if you've seen lately some of the training work that he's been putting out, but I tell you what, mate, I've not seen him in better nick. He is determined, obviously, to fight his way back into, first of all, the Hurricane side, because he's got to get rid of Roygard out of the starting spot, and then equally into the All Blacks. So, look, a brief answer to your question is, I'm not sure about the 9, because I'm not entirely convinced that I know what Ray's is going to do, but I think Cam, Roygard and Finlay Christie didn't do anything wrong at the Rugby World Cup, so they'd be the 2 front runners, but I wouldn't dismiss TJ. And then how's Faleo Fakatava's off-season gone?
Yeah, good
really
point.
Interested in that. And then obviously the only one you throw in the mix, if Beauden's not there, you have to think about Damien McKenzie. He's made a statement. He wants that jersey. He wants to play there, and he wants to play there for the All Blacks. He's said it himself. He's challenged himself. He has to go out there in front of that jersey now and, most importantly, be consistent.
Which is different from playing Super Rugby, playing All Black Rugby as well. Let's turn our attention to Joe Schmidt then. I said at the beginning of the program, look, to me, I applaud Australia doing this. Look, he's a brilliant coach. We know all of that. But I feel like right now, it's a bit like giving him the Highlanders coaching job. And no disrespect to the Highlanders, because I know Dave Dillon well, and I really like Clark as well. But if Joe Schmidt was today put in charge of the Highlanders, we'd all be going, that's a great appointment. But it doesn't mean the Highlanders are going to win Super Rugby. And I think that's the best analogy to draw. It's a great appointment, Australian rugby, but you've still got to find a better squad than what you've got. So how does he do that?
Yeah, and how does he balance out something that he's never had to think about before, which is the Australians' selection policy for players outside of Australia? How does he look at that in the way that he wants to build a team? Does he do that from within Australia and go, look, we get these guys coming back, yes, they're world-class players, but they've been out of the system, they've been out of Super Rugby, they're slightly out of sorts of the way we want to play? Or does he go, you know what, I need to try and see if I can increase the amount of players we can grab? Do I approach the Australian Rugby Union and go, you know what, I want to bring players back that have played 40 tests or more, rather than the 75, I think it is. I'm really interested to see what pathway he goes down that selection-wise, because, otherwise he's having to pick from probably most of the players that we've seen in the last couple of years, and that's not brought up any new superstars. So a real challenge there. And probably the only other thing when I've been thinking about it, and you're going to ask me about Joe Schmidt, is, any good coaching team in the world at the moment is a coaching team. They're not just about the head coach. And I think we saw that with Ian Foster. Ultimately, when his neck was on the line and they weren't playing well as a team, let's think back to what happened. He had to change his coaching setup. He got Jason Ryan in, and he brought Joe Schmidt in because what he had wasn't working.
Yeah.
So the key for me is, who does John Schmidt trust? Who does he get around him? Is it more New Zealanders? Or is he being asked by Australian Rugby, right, well, we'll allow New Zealand to coach us, but you have to have a Stephen Larkham or a whatever come into the mix. So that, to me, is really interesting too. How much control does he have over who's going to be his assistant coaches?
Final question on this, the way that Australia play, like traditionally, and when I say traditionally, for an old bugger like me, and when you were playing against them, they played a different style. They started playing that Brumbies recycling style, but they used the ball a lot. Joe Schmidt was really pragmatic with Ireland, and he got them back to the most basic ways of playing Test rugby, which was set-piece rugby, which was kicking your points. It might have been called boring or whatever, but it was results-driven. Do you think he's going to do that? And how important is that for Australia rugby? First and foremost, win a bloody Bledisloe back.
Yeah, look, it's interesting because, again, he's got to work within the personnel. And I certainly feel that there is enough personnel there, even, like I said, being able to bring the other overseas players back. But he's now just spent quite a bit of time with the All Blacks and New Zealand rugby and gone back to maybe a slightly different way of thinking. And I think what he needs to do is he needs to think about, righto, and I know this is going to be painful to a few of the New Zealand listeners out there, he's going to take some elements of what he's learnt within the All Blacks into the Australian setup. He'd be stupid not to, because what works will work in any team. And then I wonder if he just then blends that in nicely with what he knows that Australian rugby can bring, which is slightly different, but equally what he coached in Ireland. And we get a real sort of hybrid style between the both. Again, it's him to make those decisions. It's his neck on the line if he gets that balance wrong. But I suspect if I was looking at it from the exterior, which I am, I would like to see him get a combination of the All Black style to a degree with some of their subtleties, some of their work from line out, and a little bit, like you said, of that uncompromising pod play that Ireland was so successful with when he was coaching them.
Certainly adds a hell of a lot of extra interest to the Bledisloe Cup matches this year, doesn't it? Justin, pleasure to have you back. First time in 2024, mate. I presume the golf game got a little better over the break, did it?
I've got the chipping and the putting yips, mate. And I can tell you what, there's nothing worse than golf, man. When you get around that green and you don't know where your chip's going to go, where you're going to chunk it, thin it, and then you actually finally hit a nice chip, but you four putt. At the moment, my head's frying.
No,
so the golf game is not in a good place, mate.
No, and you've been talked into it and talked out of it by the sods you're playing with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They certainly love rubbing it in, and my son is now beating me. He's beaten me the last 4 times in a row. I can tell you what, when your son starts beating you, Marty, you know you're in a dark place, and kids love to rub it in as well.
Always a pleasure, mate. We'll talk next week. Justin Marshall back with us.